The Wealth Gap: 7 Principles that Separate Those Who Accumulate Wealth from Those Who Merely Earn It. Introduction: the gap nobody talks about. Walk into any room of financially successful people, and something immediately feels off. They don't look special. They didn't all grow up privileged. Many of them came from the same neighborhoods, attended the same schools, and started their careers with similar paychecks as the people who are still stuck 20 years later. So what happened? The comfortable explanation is luck. The cynical explanation is connections. But neither fully accounts for what we consistently observe, that certain people, regardless of their starting point, tend to pull further and further ahead, not because the universe favors them, but because they have internalized a fundamentally different way of processing financial decisions. Wealth is not a number in a bank account. It is a pattern of thought that produces numbers in a bank account. Think about two graduates who land their first jobs on the same day, with the same salary, in the same city. Fast forward a decade. One owns a portfolio of assets, has multiple income streams, and could survive a year without working. The other is more comfortable, perhaps, but remains entirely dependent on their next paycheck. The external circumstances were nearly identical. The internal frameworks were not. This book is about those internal frameworks. It is not a manual for get-rich-quick schemes, and it will not promise overnight transformation. What it will do is expose 7 specific mental shifts that consistently separate wealth builders from income earners, and give you a practical path to adopting them. Here is the core insight that underpins everything that follows: most people think about money reactively. The wealthy think about money architecturally. One group responds to financial events. The other designs financial systems. That single distinction, repeated across thousands of small decisions over years and decades, is where the gap is born. Before we go further, consider a few questions. When you receive unexpected money, what is your first instinct: spend it or deploy it? When you think about your future, do you measure progress in months or in years? When you imagine financial security, do you picture a large salary or the freedom to never need one again? Your answers reveal your current financial architecture. An architecture, unlike talent, can be rebuilt. Let's begin. Principle 1: own the outcome, not the appearance. There is a subtle but devastating trap that catches most people before they even realize they've walked into it. It is the trap of performing wealth rather than building it. We live in an era that rewards the visible. Social media has turned financial identity into a public performance. The car in the driveway. The vacation photos. The restaurant check that gets split on a credit card. On the surface, these things communicate success. Beneath the surface, they are often consuming the very resources that could generate it. Status is a costume. Control is the actual garment underneath. Genuine wealth builders are obsessed with something few people talk about openly: optionality. Optionality is the capacity to choose. It is the ability to walk away from a bad job without panic, to decline an investment that feels wrong without pressure, to take a year off without catastrophe. Optionality is not built by looking wealthy. It is built by owning assets, things that generate cash flow, appreciate in value, or both. Status purchases drain optionality. Every dollar spent projecting success is a dollar that cannot produce future income. A luxury vehicle that depreciates $15,000 in its first year is not merely a financial decision, it is a decision to surrender optionality for appearance. Wealth builders think in terms of 3 layers of financial control. The first is expense mastery, knowing precisely where every dollar goes and directing it with intention. The second is income diversification, having multiple streams so that no single source controls your life. The third, and rarest, is time sovereignty, the condition in which your survival is no longer dependent on any single entity's approval. Most people spend their lives chasing layer 2 without ever constructing layer 1. And almost nobody reaches layer 3, not because it is impossible, but because the path there requires sacrificing the visible for the durable. Real financial independence is quiet. It doesn't need an audience. The people who feel most compelled to display prosperity are often the furthest from possessing it. The people who have genuinely achieved it tend to live with a conspicuous calm, because when you no longer need to prove anything, you stop spending to do so. Action step: calculate your freedom runway. Divide your current liquid savings by your monthly essential expenses. How many months could you live without income? Aim to extend this number by 6 months every year. Runway is freedom. Build it deliberately. Principle 2: build systems that work when you don't. There is an invisible ceiling in the minds of most workers. It is the ceiling constructed by the equation, income equals time multiplied by effort. Work harder, earn more. Work longer, earn more. It seems logical. It is also fundamentally limited, because you only have a finite number of hours, and effort without scale has a cap. Wealthy people understand something that most do not: effort doesn't compound, but systems do. A system that runs while you sleep is worth more than a skill you can only use while you're awake. There are 4 categories of leverage that wealth builders use to break the time for money ceiling. The first is capital leverage, money deployed to produce more money through investments, real estate, or business ownership. The second is human leverage, building teams where other people's skills amplify your vision and output. The third is technological leverage, using software, automation, and digital platforms to scale distribution and reduce repetitive labor. The fourth is reputational leverage, the compounding power of trust, expertise, and credibility that converts attention into opportunity. Consider 2 people with identical expertise. One sells consulting hours directly, their income is strictly bounded by their availability. The other packages that same expertise into a course, a book, or a productized service, their income is bounded only by demand. The knowledge is equivalent. The architecture is not. The reason most people never make this shift is not a lack of capability. It is a preference for immediate feedback. Building leverage feels slow because the early investment produces no visible return. You build the course before you sell it. You train the team before they perform. You write the system before it runs. The patient phase of building is where most people abandon the project, and where the few who persist begin their real ascent. Ask yourself a powerful question: which of your current activities, if automated or delegated, would free you to do something that creates 10 times more value? The answer to that question is a blueprint for your next year. Action step: list every income source you currently have. For each, label it L, leveraged, or T, time for money. Your goal over the next 5 years is to shift the balance toward L. This single habit, pursued consistently, transforms how wealth accumulates. Principle 3: the patience premium. There is a tax that impatient people pay every single day, and it doesn't appear on any invoice. It is the gap between what their money could have become and what they spent it on instead. Delayed gratification is perhaps the least glamorous concept in personal finance. It lacks the excitement of investment strategies or the drama of market timing. But it is arguably the most powerful wealth-building force available to ordinary people, because it requires nothing but time and the willingness to wait. Every indulgence you accelerate costs you a future you cannot yet see. Here is what makes this difficult: the brain is not wired for deferred reward. Evolution optimized humans for immediate survival, and immediate pleasure signals safety while delayed reward signals nothing yet. This is why lifestyle inflation feels so natural. When income rises, the instinct is to upgrade consumption to match: bigger home, newer car, more elaborate vacations. The upgrade feels earned. And it is earned. But it is earned at the cost of compounding. Wealth builders have trained themselves to ask a different question when faced with a major purchase. Not whether they can afford it, but what their money would become if deployed instead. $40,000 invested today at a modest annual return becomes something dramatically larger over 20 years. The car is not just a car, it is a decision about which version of your future you prefer to inhabit. This reframing doesn't require deprivation. It requires precision. The goal is not to eliminate enjoyment from life, but to distinguish between spending that enriches experience and spending that is driven purely by impulse. Impulse spending is expensive not because of its immediate cost, but because of the opportunity it displaces. One practical technique: impose a mandatory waiting period on all non-essential purchases above a certain threshold. 48 hours of separation between impulse and transaction is often enough to let reason catch up to emotion. Many purchases that felt urgent in the moment simply dissolve in the cool air of a day's reflection. Action step: for the next 30 days, track every purchase you make and categorize it as intentional or impulsive. At the end of the month, calculate the total of the impulsive category. Then calculate what that amount would grow into over 20 years. That number is the true cost of your current habits. Principle 4. Rethink what risk actually means. If you asked 1,000 people whether investing in the stock market is risky, the majority would say yes. If you asked those same people whether depending entirely on a single employer for their survival is risky, most would say no. This asymmetry reveals a fundamental flaw in how ordinary people understand risk. We fear the visible fluctuation and ignore the invisible fragility. A portfolio that drops 20% in a correction feels terrifying because the loss is measurable and immediate. But a life structured around a single income source, one where a layoff, a health event, or an industry disruption could trigger financial collapse, feels normal simply because it is common. The riskiest position you can hold is complete dependence. Its danger is hidden only because so many people hold it. Wealth builders distinguish between two categories of risk. The first is volatility risk, short-term swings in asset values that are uncomfortable but recoverable. The second is structural risk, underlying vulnerabilities in your financial architecture that could produce catastrophic, long-term damage. The financially sophisticated accept volatility readily and work obsessively to eliminate structural risk. When markets decline sharply, two groups of people respond in fundamentally different ways. Those who are overleveraged, undersaved, and emotionally reactive sell into the fear, locking in losses and missing the recovery. Those who prepared, who maintain liquidity, diversified income, and have a long-time horizon, treat market corrections as discounts. They do not respond differently because they feel less fear. They respond differently because preparation converts panic into opportunity. The question worth sitting with is not whether you are taking risks, but whether you are taking the right ones. Investing in diversified assets over decades is a calculated risk with strong historical odds. Remaining dependent on a single income source while prices rise and industries shift is also a risk, just one that nobody frames as such. Action step: map your financial vulnerabilities. If your primary income disappeared tomorrow, how long could you sustain your current life? List every single point of financial fragility in your life. Then build a specific plan to address the most serious one within the next 90 days. Principle 5. The market rewards value, not effort. The most seductive myth in modern work culture is that effort and reward exist in direct proportion. Work hard enough, long enough, and the compensation will follow. This belief is not entirely false. Effort is necessary. But it is profoundly insufficient, because the market does not pay for effort. It pays for value and effort are not the same thing. A surgeon earns more than a general practitioner not because they work more hours, but because their specialized skill creates outcomes that the market prices differently. A software product earns its creator revenue around the clock without any additional labor, because the value was embedded into the product once and distributed infinitely. An author earns royalties years after writing a book, because the value lives in the intellectual property, not in any ongoing activity. Stop asking how to get paid more. Start asking how to create something that pays you repeatedly. The wealth building implication is clear: shift your focus from compensation to value creation. Compensation is what you negotiate at the time of employment. Value is what you build over time and what the market will eventually price beyond any single negotiation. The greatest earners are not those who asked for the highest salary, they are those who made themselves nearly impossible to replace and then created systems that extended their value beyond their personal availability. The concept of ownership deserves special attention here. Employees trade their time for income. Owners trade their judgment for equity. The distinction matters enormously because equity grows with the enterprise. When a business or asset appreciates, the owner benefits from the entire increase. When an employee's company succeeds, they receive the wage they agreed to and nothing more. This is not a critique of employment, it is an observation about architecture. Wherever possible, seek ownership stakes, equity positions, and recurring revenue streams rather than purely exchanging hours for dollars. Building rare value also means deliberately combining skills in ways that are uncommon. The intersection of technical knowledge and communication ability, or of creative instinct and analytical rigor, is far more valuable than either alone because fewer people live at that intersection, and the market prices scarcity accordingly. Action step: identify the single most valuable thing you know how to do. Then ask, is this value accessible only when I am present? If so, design one way to package it: a course, a framework, a tool, a written guide that makes it accessible without your direct involvement. Start building that package this week. Principle 6: Emotion is the hidden cost. Open a conversation about personal finance and within minutes, someone will invoke a number, a savings rate, a portfolio return, a debt-to-income ratio. These numbers matter. But they are not the primary driver of financial outcomes. The primary driver is far less quantitative and far less comfortable to discuss. It is emotion. Specifically, it is the unmanaged emotional responses that cause people to sell when markets fall, spend when they feel celebratory, borrow when they feel anxious, and overextend when they feel invincible. No financial strategy, however elegant, survives prolonged exposure to an undisciplined emotional environment. You will never outperform your emotional habits. Every financial decision you make is filtered through them. There are 4 primary emotional forces that destroy wealth quietly and consistently. Fear triggers premature selling and excessive conservatism. People lock in losses to escape the discomfort of watching numbers fall, only to miss recoveries that would have more than compensated. Greed drives dangerous leverage and reckless speculation. People concentrate positions and abandon diversification during bull markets, mistaking a rising tide for personal genius. Comparison inflates lifestyle spending. People upgrade their surroundings not because they need the upgrade, but because proximity to others who have upgraded makes restraint feel like failure. An ego hardens bad decisions. People hold losing positions, resist adjusting their strategies, and cling to sunk cost because admitting mistakes threatens their sense of competence. The practical antidote to emotional interference is systematic design. Automate your investing so that contributions happen without requiring a decision each month. Diversify so broadly that no single holding can trigger panic. Establish a written investment policy that specifies exactly what you would do in various scenarios, and commit to following it before the scenarios arrive, when reason rather than emotion is driving. The goal is not to eliminate emotion from your financial life. It is to reduce the number of decisions that emotion can influence. Wealth building, done well, is genuinely boring. It involves the same consistent behaviors repeated for years without dramatic events. This is precisely why so few people sustain it. The human mind craves novelty and stimulation, and a strategy that never changes offers neither. But boring strategies, consistently applied, compound into extraordinary outcomes. Action step: before your next significant financial decision, write down, what emotion am I feeling right now? What would I decide if I felt nothing? What does my long-term strategy say I should do? Then act on the third question. Practice this process until it becomes automatic. Principle 7: Build for the horizon beyond you. There is a final dimension of wealth that most financial guidance ignores entirely, perhaps because it is harder to quantify, or perhaps because it requires a level of maturity that many conversations around money resist. It is the dimension of legacy. Legacy is not about inheritance in a legal sense, though it includes that. It is about the quality and durability of what you build, whether your wealth serves only your current comfort or extends into something that outlasts you and benefits those who come after. Lifestyle wealth is consumed by the generation that builds it. Legacy wealth compounds across the ones that follow. The distinction between lifestyle thinking and legacy thinking changes the texture of financial decisions in profound ways. Lifestyle thinking optimizes for the present experience, the quality of current consumption, the visibility of current success, the comfort of current circumstances. Legacy thinking optimizes for durability, the structures that will remain functional and generative long after the person who built them is no longer present to maintain them. Empirically, self-made wealth that is not accompanied by the transmission of financial knowledge tends to dissipate within 2 generations. The money transfers, but the architecture does not. Without understanding how wealth was built, heirs often repeat the spending patterns of the general population rather than the building patterns of the founders. This is not a character flaw, it is a predictable outcome of receiving resources without receiving the frameworks that generated them. This suggests that the most important inheritance you can leave is not a sum of money but a system of thinking. Teaching the people you love how to evaluate opportunities, how to be patient, how to build, and how to resist the seductive pull of immediate gratification, this is an asset that cannot be taxed or squandered by market volatility. Legacy thinking also clarifies decisions in the present. When your time horizon extends beyond your own lifetime, the question changes from what serves me now to what endures and compounds. That shift in framing tends to quiet impulsive decisions, reduce ego-driven choices, and orient behavior toward the genuinely durable. Action step: write a financial mission statement, not a budget, but a declaration of what your wealth is ultimately for. Who does it protect? What does it make possible? What values should it transmit? Read it once a month. Let it filter your decisions. The foundation: identity precedes strategy. 7 principles. 7 frameworks. 7 action steps. But all of them rest on a single foundation, and without it, none of them hold. That foundation is identity. How you see yourself financially determines more than any strategy you adopt. If you see yourself as someone who is bad with money, your subconscious will enforce that story at every opportunity. Every near miss with a good habit, every moment of temptation, every stretch of discipline will be sabotaged by the quiet conviction that this is not who you are. Identity is the most powerful force in behavioral consistency. An identity, fortunately, is not fixed. People change their financial identities every day. It does not happen in a single transformative moment. It happens in the accumulation of small decisions that deviate from the old pattern, each tiny act of investing instead of spending, of waiting instead of reacting, of building instead of buying. These are not just financial moves. They are identity votes. An identity is built by the majority vote of our habitual behavior. There is also a powerful practice in reduction. Before any new strategy can take root, it often requires clearing the ground. What habits, relationships, assumptions, and obligations in your financial life are adding weight rather than traction? Complexity is the enemy of consistency. Simplify. Subtract. Create space for the new architecture to stabilize. The people who have made this transition before you are not exceptional in intelligence or luck. They are exceptional in one thing: they decided to see themselves differently, and then they acted as if that vision were already true, consistently, patiently, and without requiring the world to confirm it before committing. Conclusion: the architecture of a different future. Everything in this book converges on a single point. The gap between those who accumulate meaningful wealth and those who remain perpetually dependent on their next paycheck is not primarily about access to capital, quality of education, or fortune of birth. It is about the architecture of thought, the questions people ask, the time horizons they operate within, the identity they inhabit, and the systems they build or fail to build. The 7 principles we explored are not secrets in the traditional sense. They are hiding in plain sight, visible to anyone who examines the habits and mindsets of long-term wealth builders. What makes them feel like secrets is that they run against the current of the culture most of us swim in, a culture that valorizes immediate spending over patient building, status visibility over quiet compounding, and emotional reaction over strategic design. The path less chosen is not more difficult. It is simply less comfortable in the short term and far more rewarding in the long one. You now have the framework. But a framework is only as valuable as the daily decisions it shapes. Knowing that leverage matters is not the same as building a leveraged income stream. Understanding delayed gratification is not the same as practicing it next Tuesday when an impulse presents itself. The gap between comprehension and behavior is where most people live, and where the work actually is. Starting from today, you face a choice that will repeat itself thousands of times in the years ahead. The choice between the comfortable path and the intentional one. Between reacting and designing. Between consuming now and building for later. Each individual choice feels small. But small choices, made consistently in one direction over time, do not produce small outcomes. They produce transformed lives. The people who are ahead of you financially did not simply outrun you. They started earlier, stayed longer, and built more deliberately. And the most important word in that sentence is started. Because the day you begin is the day the compounding begins. And compounding, once initiated, is relentless. Begin here. Automate one investment contribution before the end of this week. Identify one recurring expense to eliminate or reduce this month. Dedicate 30 minutes weekly to expanding your financial knowledge. Build one skill this year that could become a scalable income source. Evaluate every major decision through the lens of a 10-year outcome, not a 10-day feeling. 20 years from now, a version of you exists who made this choice and followed through. That version is not wealthier by accident. They are wealthier by architecture. By patience. By the accumulated weight of thousands of small decisions made in alignment with a long-term vision. That version of you is possible. And the only decision separating you from that future is whether you choose to begin now. The principles are timeless. The gap is real. The choice is yours.